Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Gigi Kopelak. My guest today is one of the busiest artists that I know. In addition to her very difficultly executed work, which we'll cover and talk about today, she's also involved in galleries and organizations. Her name is Arle Sklar-Weinstein, and I'm very happy to have you, Arle.
Thank you, Gigi.
Now, I mentioned different galleries, but the one that I know that you're most involved in right now, I know you're in other things too, is the Blue Door Gallery.
Yes, about a year ago, or maybe more than a year and a half ago, this developed as a mission from the Blue Door Artists Association. And I became its organizer, designer, and director. And it's been a labor of love and great effort, but we're so pleased and proud of it. As a matter of fact, I have to thank you for being such an incredible co-curator and partner for the show that's there currently, Women About Woman, a dynamite show. I'm so pleased with it. But it's quite wonderful.
Right, but you're being very humble because you got into a storefront in Yonkers that was a mess. And you really designed it and made the moving walls and made it beautiful, and you made it what it is today, and it's terrific. It really is.
It was an incredible gift of Bob Miller of West Ave to offer us that space for 5 years rent-free because of the community services that we had been offering as the association. And of course, without that kind of support, we couldn't possibly think about doing it. And so it's been really an amazing miracle. I call it the miracle in Yonkers.
Right. And it's just one of the many things that you do. We could spend hours and hours, but I want to get to your work. I want to get to the very beginning. I know that a lot of artists say when they were 2 years old, they knew. Would you say that too, that you were an artist?
I was a toddler. It's probably almost before memory. But I was born in Detroit, Michigan. My dad was then playing in an orchestra in Detroit, the Detroit Symphony. And he eventually moved to New York to be part of Toscanini's new NBC Symphony at the time. But we were living in a house in Detroit that was near a lot, and I can remember digging in the soil and being very excited about the colors that were coming up. And it was like, oh, the tactile, the color. I mean, I couldn't contain myself.
Really? So you have a really early memory of the tactile, because, your work is very tactile.
Yeah, I think it is. Because after being a painter and a printmaker, even my printmaking was embossed and tactilely available, if you will.
Right.
But I think I'm finding my current work in fiber satisfies so much of that need to touch and feel and have real texture in addition to the visual texture.
Yeah, I don't know how to do this. So should we go right to your fiber? But I want to go back and start from when you first started showing. I think you told me that you were working with really tight little drawings. Is that how you began?
Well, you understand that I had studied at NYU both for graduate and undergraduate work, and had a mentor named Hale Woodruff, who was an amazing professor, very beloved at NYU. He had trained in Paris as an abstract painter. He was a super muralist, very impacted by the Mexican muralists. And he became my mentor for all the years that I was at NYU and beyond. And I can remember seeing his show by accident. I was a sophomore. Going up to the Betty Parsons Gallery, opened the elevator, and in shock seeing there are my paintings, only much better. He had conveyed so much of the way he solved painting problems and his color range and structure that I realized how much he was telling me how he was a painter. But it was a wonderful experience. It took me quite a number of years to wean myself, and I did explain that to him. He said, well, you could have studied with a terrible artist. So cute. But I found after some psychological experiences, I was showing down at the Coda Gallery on 10th Street. And there were some exhibitions by artists who had taken psilocybin or magic mushrooms. And I was intrigued by what they were coming to. Now, mind you, my training had been in this large muscle movement of abstract expressionism. And when I saw these very minutely detailed, exquisite little drawings or paintings, I think my jaw dropped because I wanted to know what was that world about. And after much study, 3 months of reading everything I could, even meeting Timothy Leary there and having long conversations with him, decided to go on a guided trip, as it were, of which I had 3. Each one very purposeful, each one dedicated perhaps to something that I wanted to enhance in my own life. I was in my early 30s, so this was not like, as Alan Watts said, playing tic-tac-toe with a giant computer.
You were married already?
I was married, I had children, and I was just exploring this other realm of being. I'd also had some analysis and was a little more secure in feeling that I don't know if there were any real demons that I will uncover. So I wasn't really afraid. I should have been, maybe. But
well, you're still here,
still
and everything.
here.
And you're certainly intelligent.
So I discovered the great pleasure of small muscle drawings, 30-hour drawings. And that drawing that's called...
Well, is this from the experience where you saw these images in your mind?
I think several things happen when you're under the influence of LSD or any other psycho drug. Your normal brain barriers seem to break down. You can't function, you can't be in preservation mode, because everything opens up and is available to everything else. So every sense is combined or merged or somehow blended with the other senses. So you might hear something and see it as a vision, or see something in one form and it becomes another. For example, I remember dawn in this wonderful meditation house that I was in. Dawn was coming, the trees were bare, and I looked down at myself and I saw I had some blanket fuzz, and I did this very feminine thing of brushing myself off. And immediately the trees began to do this Steinberg drawing. This
And
very elaborate.
this is still in your memory?
Yes, I mean, I could unreel it like a movie even now, so many years afterwards.
Right, so your brain was really...
So it was really, taking in this information about myself.
And this influenced your art?
I think so. I became a member of the New Visionaries. In fact, Art Forum picked up the show that I was in at the East Hampton Gallery in New York City. And it was an amazing group. I was then also included in the psychedelic art book, Masters in Houston. And that was sort of strange to me because I now found myself with a new label. But it also, I think, helped me to respond. I noticed that every time I do anything new, that it cycles back, perhaps not in a circle, but in a spiral where it's at another level, but it's coming back to that underground or that surreal place.
Right, and so I want to show one of those early drawings that you...
Oh yes, well that drawing that's called Inside a Seed was one of those early drawings. And that was what Finley Eversole in his book Art and Spiritual...
Yeah, we have some wonderful books here that your work is included in.
I feel very honored to be in that collection. It's just incredible. But he wrote a chapter about my work just to illustrate some point that he was making. And I think my link to my...
And it was one of these pen drawings?
It was this Inside a Seed.
Oh, okay.
It was that very one that he found in the psychedelic art book.
Okay.
And was so drawn to it and found worlds of meaning for himself and wrote about that.
Okay.
But I think he was also familiar with the group that I was in because there are other people from that New Visionary group that are in the book as well. Around that time, I also read somewhere that de Kooning was using hollow doors as a support for his painting. And I went, oh, that's kind of interesting, not have to stretch these big canvases. So I ran down to my local lumber yard and got all the seconds because I only needed one good side.
That's true.
And started doing rectangular paintings. And then it occurred to me, I'm on wood, I'm not on stretched canvas, why am I staying with the rectangle? What would happen? The what if words are wonderful, aren't they, Gigi?
Right, yes.
So I got my jigsaw out and I began to cut into shapes. That shape painting that is called Woman was one of the ones that I did.
So this is pretty big then, this shaped painting?
Well, it's not that big. I mean, if they're 30 inches high, I mean, the door wasn't a full door. I'd cut the doors in half or use portions of them, right? Okay. So one of the things that I discovered about that, if I was painting on a shape, I was really painting a sculptural form, even though it was flat. But because I had changed its outer contours, it could be considered a bas-relief.
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And I found if the image didn't marry with the shape, it didn't work. That was a whole new place to go. So that was sort of wonderful. The next work, the assemblage, I said, okay, now I can actually open up one layer of the wood and use that somehow to embed things, to show different layers.
Okay.
And so that progressed to using
So are you
found
working in
objects.
series though? Would you say you did a series of these shape paintings,
Oh,
and then
yes.
you moved on to the assemblage and?
Well, I started with the shapes, and then I realized that this hollow door had other properties.
Okay.
And eventually, it's not in any of the group of photographs I have here, but I also realized that when I opened up these doors, it was a very cheap Luan mahogany, very splintery. The inside was really reinforced cardboard.
Yeah, it's a corrugated
Cardboard,
cardboard. It's a-
right?
yeah.
So the quality of the material wasn't satisfying.
Okay.
And I spent an awful lot of time cutting and sanding and doing. And I thought, well, what would happen if I went to masonite and
Okay.
build up my layers now with masonite? The Hudson River Museum has one of those gigantic painting, 4 by 6 feet. And then when I realized that I couldn't move it by myself, I said, now I gotta understand stretched canvas.
Okay, and you go round again. Now, it's interesting, you're talking a lot about the materials. Do you find that the materials is what inspires you when you're working on something, or do you have an idea in your mind and the idea is, or
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
I think one of my dilemmas is
Challenges. Let's say it's one of your challenges.
No, one of my dilemmas
Okay.
is that I'm easily bored.
Oh, okay.
And when I have solved the same problem over and over again, it stops being that challenge.
Okay.
Okay, and I find I have to find a way to keep myself amused and amazed. So sometimes it's new techniques, like going into printmaking, going into computer. Sometimes it's a new material.
Okay.
And in this case, the wood, the hollow door, its possibilities, the doors it led me through, literally, like, opening up parts of the surface, cutting the outer shapes, led me always to another way of approaching and influencing what it was I was painting.
Okay. I see that. All right. That's very interesting. So that's what led you then to the yarn pieces. I would think.
I think in the early 70s there was a very big crafts movement. Sheila Hicks was one of those main people, and I must have seen in the atmosphere or somewhere the idea of wrapping. Little did I know how that was going to go, but again, it was a challenge. So I found myself buying these gigantic rolls of jute.
You don't do things small, do you?
No,
You're going to go for it.
Well, Judy, that's an interesting thought, because I find that I can't really explore anything in one shot.
Okay.
It really has to be a series. It has to be a number of avenues on that same path of finding out where other possibilities are with that material. So in this case, I didn't want to buy a dime store's worth of jute. I bought thousands of feet of jute and walked it up and down my long studio until I had bundles of maybe 20 or 30 strands. Grabbed it in the center and began wrapping very tightly until I could actually bend it and capture the whole thing. And found that gravity was a great friend, because as I wrapped and held it in a particular way, I could actually create the forms of curves and shapes. I could then unbundle parts of it and wrap those individually. So it's almost like seeing an upside down tree.
Okay.
If you think about the base and all the getting out to the very end of the twigs, that would be how I would end it. But more than that material, I think what came together for me was seeing on television this wonderful NOVA program. It was the first time the bathysphere had been able to submerge as far down as the fissures in the bottom of the Pacific. And chemosynthesis was what was feeding these unknown creatures, not photosynthesis, down too deep for light. And among them were the sea worms, giant sea worms, 8 feet tall, in clusters at the bottom, with their huge shapes and their mouths at the top. So that was one notion of that form. I was also ending a teaching job because enrollment had dropped at my local elementary school. I was the art teacher. And I was kind of blue. And I thought, what's going to get me out of this crazy mood? So I just had an image of squeezing a huge tube of paint and letting that shape puddle down to the floor. Those two images came together. And I call them my rainbow colonies. And then the next question was, well, how do I construct this? And that's when the notion of doing something wrapped occurred to me.
Okay.
So it's hard to know why I went that way, but it was like just an exploration. I was a painter and a printmaker by then. And what am I doing with wrapping wool? You know?
But what's interesting is that was 20 years ago, 30 years ago when you were doing that,
Yeah.
and you just had a show with them. Again.
Extraordinary. Extraordinary. I mean, once that show was over and I sold a few pieces, and I think I might have mentioned to you at one point being at West Broadway Gallery, which was my gallery then on West Broadway between Spring and Prince in Soho. And I had hung these wrappings with fish line from the ceiling. And at first look, I thought, oh God, it's so decorative because the colors were bright and, you know, acrylic yarn. And it wasn't until people moved through the space that it got activated. And I went, oh, they move, they live, you know. So it was a very powerful show for, you know, unexpectedly so. Someone from the Wool Bureau came in and decided to commission me to do a 17-foot wall for them. And they wanted to buy this work. They said, but it has to be 100% wool. The Wool Bureau.
Yeah.
These were acrylic yarn.
Right.
I had to start all over.
But you did it.
We did it. I pulled in my daughter. I pulled in any artist friend that would be willing to wrap after I showed them what I was doing. And we did create this incredible 17-foot wall, which was amazing.
And so, which is at the show, was at Silvermine in Connecticut that you just had a show of these.
That's
was
right.
it wool or was it the acrylic?
It's a combination.
It was the combination.
It might have been a few pieces of the wool, but mostly the acrylic.
Yeah.
As I'm preparing for the show that's coming up called Total Immersion at the Art Place Gallery in Fairfield, I'll talk to you about that a little bit.
Okay.
I decided because it was such a hit at Silvermine, people were like, whoa, what fun, you know?
Yeah.
And Jody Silver, who was my collaborator in this, in Relation 2, we called the show, had created these wonderful jungle creatures, monkeys and birds, and just very colorful pieces. So it was really a very fantasy-like jungle. But I'll backtrack a little bit and tell you that they were put away in storage and I hadn't thought about them until I was speaking to a friend who was describing how her marine biologist son had just discovered these sea worms again and was the first one able to bring them up alive. Because they're so gelatinous, you wonder how is that possible? And I described my show to her and she went nuts. And I brought them to her, I brought a few to her, and she bought them for her son as gifts. But I had already unearthed them from my storage, or so I thought. It wasn't until I was getting something else out of my attic that we discovered another whole box, probably the more yarn ones. And so I am really planning to incorporate them in the new installation at Art Place.
Okay, which is your gallery that you're in Fairfield, Connecticut.
Right.
Okay. And when does that show open?
On Sunday, May 2nd.
Okay.
At 3 o'clock. It should be startling.
Yeah.
In fact, can I hold up my card and show you that card?
Yeah. Well, let's get into what is really what you're doing now, which is, I think, is fabulous because you're taking a very contemporary medium, which is the computer, and you're taking a very old medium, which is sewing, and you have combined these to come up with some fabulous work.
Oh, thanks, Judy.
And I think it's amazing. And so I want to show some of them. So let's talk about some of the ones that you want to talk about. We could pick this one, Ancestors, if you want. That was showing at the Katona Museum as a featured artist.
Right.
And that's from your travels, I think, in China or Japan?
In Japan.
In Japan.
In Japan. I was there for 18 days with a group called Lamia Inc. And a small group of American artists was showing with a group of Sakai City artists in the museum in Sakai City. After a week of their feting us and banqueting us and hosting us, it was so wonderful. We were traveling into the Japanese countryside and up into their holy mountains, Mount Koyasan being one. And I was so moved by that experience, the whole Japanese experience, of course. But I found this tomb of all these Japanese faces and photographed them, not knowing, you know, what kind of group this might have been, whether it was commercial or a social group. I had no idea. And at another location, there was a waterless river, really made of rocks, that had this incredible bonsai tree in the middle of it. And so very carefully cleaning up my photograph of that to just have the bare bones of the tree, I superimposed that on the faces. It was cherry blossom time, which is a very special time. And as we see the blossoms here, they're so beautiful. But it has a very special spiritual meaning for the Japanese culture. And I put sequins and glass beads in the trees, materials that I probably would not have used ordinarily. But it so captured the essence of that spirit and liveliness and the sense of the ancestors being so honored. The other thing that I did as I was staring at these faces, I noticed that some of them were women, and decided to what I call a satin stitch, just a very tight stitch in red, which was just that salt and pepper I needed for that very grayish green image, to have a subtext of these are the women in this culture, because usually you don't see that.
So what we're looking at is a fabric. It's a large piece.
It's stitched. It's a quilt.
It's a quilt. It's a quilt.
Well, I have to say, it's difficult to use the word quilt because these are not bed quilts.
Right.
This is a studio art quilt.
But even using the word quilt, your fabric art is what your work is.
Yes.
And you use the computer, you use the photography, but you also sew over it.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm basically building the 3 layers that a traditional quilt would be made of. The top, the batting in the middle, and the backing fabric. What's different is that I'm doing this digitally and layering my images in the computer. Sometimes I'll use some of the filters and distort in the computer, and anyone who knows Photoshop understands what I'm talking about. And if you don't know, it's a way of affecting imagery.
Right. Well, you're making art first in the computer.
Right.
And then you're taking that art and you're making art again with the fiber.
Exactly.
And recently your work has even gotten another layer on it.
Right. I found this incredible organza. It's striped, and the stripe it's all white, but part of it's opaque and part of it's translucent in about 1-inch bands. And I discovered that if I put that organza on top of a backing fabric and then put my transfer image and heat set it on there, where the white is opaque on the organza stripe, it holds the image, and where it's translucent, it goes right through the organza and hits the background fabric. So that when I'm constructing the fiber quilted piece, I'm stitching the background fabric together so that it becomes one whole cloth.
Right.
But the top layer of organza, I'm letting float on top of each panel with just 4 beads holding the corners. So you get a little bit of air in there and a little sense of movement. It's awful to try to photograph because it seems like it's out of focus.
Do we have a photograph of that here that you can explain?
I think so. I think if you saw the close-up of the magic hour,
okay,
you would probably see some of that, almost in every one, that you see of the layers of that striped organza floating a little bit above.
Yeah, and there's one, the recycle seed pods.
Oh, yes, that would show that. That would show that. Yes, and
yeah.
in fact, the detail of that, the small, that enlarged version, that has within it a photograph that I had also made into a smaller work. It was a photo montage of Manor Park gazebo out in Larchmont, and I superimposed some of the tree forms right into the roof. In other words, in using many layers of photograph, I'm creating another image that isn't real.
Right.
But I took that image, turned it upside down, and incorporated it in the seed pod, in the recycled seed pod as another water image.
So that they're fascinating to look at because you don't. It's photography, but it has this image because it's on the a fabric of being, you know, suffused.
Yes, yes.
And then and then the layers on top of it. So you have a lot of things going on at the same time, and you really see the difference. You know, if you look, like you have this, you have this image of the postcard,
right?
And then you have the image of
the
quilted piece that you took this from, and they're you almost don't feel like they're the same.
No, it has a very different feel to it.
Right.
I mean, you see vaguely the image, but the tactile quality and the mystery of the space in between adds. There's another element too, and that is the white on white fabric that I choose comes through as if it were watercolor, because the ink is so translucent that whatever is on the fabric comes through in the lighter areas. So if there is a pre-printed design on the fabric, that becomes part of the new work.
Right.
And it just enriches that surface so beautifully.
Yeah.
But I want to tell you, I've gone one step beyond now for the new show. Again, this is part of, well, I've solved that problem a few times. What else? Where else do I go? And it occurred to me that while my work is using interesting materials, it really always is about layers. Layers of meaning, layers of reality, layers of unconscious meanings. That's the spiritual aspect, and it's also part of our human condition where no thought is ever simple. It always has ramifications. You know, you experience something and wham, something from your past is right there. Layers of layers of layers. So I think I try in my work to also express through layers how nothing is simply seen at one glance, that there's much more hidden or revealed slowly. In fact, that's my definition of a good art. If you're not fed instantly and you see it all at once, it's wallpaper.
Right, that's true.
You know,
true.
But if something feeds you and continually feeds you, it's an enriching thing to have something like to live with. I thought, well, I've been sewing these panels together to enlarge the whole image. That's how I got them big. What if?
There's that what if.
I could figure out a structure that would suspend these layers and let them float without any stitching in between.
Wow.
So that's what I've invented for this coming show.
Wow, that sounds really exciting.
It's
so they're going to be large. They're large, or?
Well, they're room size. I mean, they're like 60 inches for 30 inches. I mean, they're not over large.
Okay.
But one particular work is made up of 32 panels, and the panels are a little smaller than letter size, but by 3 layers deep.
Okay.
So I have like 3.
And they're
dowels,
transparent.
And they're transparent.
Okay.
Well, except for the back layer.
Oh, the back layer is opaque.
The 2 on top are translucent.
Okay.
Transparent.
And we don't have an image of these, so really people have to go to this show.
Yes. Well, there's one here. It's called Ice River Vinebound, and that's the photographic image montage that I started with. But that's the image that was the first of these floating.
When it came to you as
a floating
to come up with a whole
new way of doing it.
Oh,
yeah.
So and like I said, on top of the directing of the Blue Door and the shows and all these wonderful books.
I'm a secret engineered architect, I think.
Well, I don't know where you have the time. I really.
Well, sometimes I just don't sleep.
Oh, well, I guess that's one way to do it.
Into the wee hours, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Arle, I wish that we could spend so much more time, but this has been so enjoyable.
Oh, thanks. And gee, that went by fast.
Oh, yeah, it does go very fast. I know. But thank you so much for coming. This has been so interesting for me.
And it's always such a pleasure to have conversation with you, Gigi.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for watching.